Welcome back, everybody. So in the last lesson, we talked about React Memo and a little bit about React Pure Component. Now, Pure Component and React Memo are very similar, so it just depends on which component you're using it on. If you're using it on a class component, use Pure Component. If you're using a functional component, use React Memo. I'm going to focus on React Memo because it's pretty much the same lesson. The only difference is just what you use when you instantiate your component. So it's very much overlapping. But let's continue with our lesson on React Memo and optimizations with it. So another concern we have to remember is that while this React Memo saves us on shallow comparisons of our props, it does not save us on referential equality. Meaning that if instead of passing person in this way, where we have it as a static value where it always points to the same object in memory, if I were to instead change it so that I pass in a value like so, where I'm instantiating the actual object directly in line of my return statement, what happens is that every time return and render gets called, a new object is getting generated every single time. Because JavaScript is simply re-instantiating everything when it runs through our render. Which means that when it hits this line, it sees that a new object declaration in line has been made, so it's just going to create a new object. Which means that even though we've memoized our actual button, we're still going to re-render every single time, because every time the render call gets made, a new object gets made that gets passed into our person, and React Memo won't save us there. Because it says that, oh, person is actually a new object. I'm just going to assume that we need to re-render because it's a brand new prop. So that's one thing to remember that we have to be careful about if we're trying to actually optimize our code, is inlining objects like this. So let's change this back to using our person state property. But let's also keep in mind that in JavaScript, functions and arrays are also objects. So if we inline functions or if we inline arrays, we have to remember to be careful there as well. Just to be aware that those are going to be re-renders that will skip our React memoization, because those props will also always evaluate to being a different prop if we're inlining and passing in functions as properties to memoized components. Again, the main thing to remember as well is that before you start optimizing and moving your functions out into places where they don't change and we try and make them more static by the reference of what we're passing into our memoized components, think about whether or not that's actually worthwhile. Because again, actually doing that and instantiating that does come with some performance risks itself when we look at how it slowed down the initial mount time of our person component when we called React Memo. So these are just, again, things that you got to keep in mind. Always optimize when there's a problem first. But these are gotchas that you should be aware of when it comes to optimizing your components when you actually need to. So let's take this and actually apply it to something in our application that we've already seen. Because now that we've learned what it is that it does, how do we actually apply it into our application? Well, there's actually a couple caveats we have to remember with our application. We are using React Redux, and we're also using reselect, which means that a lot of our components get their props not from their parent components, but from Redux and the connect higher order component pattern that we used. Because a lot of our actual prop derivation is decided by map state to props and our reselect, because we've used create selector or reselect everywhere, a lot of our actual props are already memoized, meaning that unless the actual props coming into our selector functions has changed, we will not actually get new props, meaning that our components will not re-render. So that's a very important thing to remember about our application. We do already have performance improvements over native React applications because we're using the right Redux libraries to optimize our code already. Other than that, though, you might want to look around the application, and only when you notice that there is some slowdowns, then perform an optimization. So one that I can guess probably is going to be a problem is in our cart dropdown component. If we were to open up our DevTools and go to our React profiler, and let's say, for example, we go to our jackets page. We open our dropdown, and I start adding items. If I start profiling, and I add 2 black jackets, 2 blue jackets, and 5 gray jackets, if I stop the profiler, we'll see this really much larger nest of components because we have way more components inside of our application. But if I go into my header, and then in the header component, I go down to the cart dropdown. Inside of the cart dropdown, I will see the cart item that I had. This cart item is my black jean shearling jacket. We'll actually see here that my black jean shearling jacket ended up getting re-rendered 9 times, even though I only modified the value that got passed in as the prop to black shearling, which was the quantity object on our cart item, twice. The first time when I added it and the second time when I added another one. These are technically the only times that this component should have re-rendered. But why did it render for every single new component that got added? Well, this is because inside of the cart dropdown component, our cart items is changing. The array of cart items is completely changed, meaning that every cart item is getting re-rendered. But we don't actually want to do that. We want our cart item to only update when it has to. So this only should occur if the item that got passed in ever changes. So this is a great time for us to memoize this cart item. So here, what we can do is we can say react.memo on our cart item, like so. If I save this, and now if I go back to my application, and then I start the profiler, and then I add 1 black shearling, 2 blue jackets, and 5 more gray jackets. If we look inside of our header now, and we look inside of our cart dropdown, we'll see that our cart components are getting memoized. But what we'll also see is that we're only rendering them the 1 additional time whenever we added something to it. So here we'll see that our black shearling jacket only added 1 re-render, instead of the possible 7 because we updated 7 items. If we go back up and look at the blue jean jacket, we'll see that it got 2 renders because I added 2 items for blue jean jacket. And subsequently, we'll see that our gray jean jacket will render 5 times for the 5 that they got added. It didn't get the initial 3 from the black and the blue jackets respectively being added. So here we can see we've done a performance optimization because we've saved ourselves on numerous re-renders across any number of cart items that were inside of our cart dropdown to begin with. So this is a handy re-render that we just did. Now, if you would like, you can go around the application and play with the profiler and actually see how many re-renders are happening and decide from there whether or not the performance saves based on the amount of milliseconds you save and the amount of re-renders that are actually happening is worth it, because this is a great time to practice. And performance is all about getting dirty with the optimizer and reading it and getting in there and just seeing what's actually improving and what's not. This is more of an exercise for you to get comfortable with the profiler, again, in actual production, when you actually see slowdowns or when you actually see complaints. Then is when you should start identifying a problem and then optimizing. Don't get too overzealous with optimizing ahead of time just because you assume there might be a performance problem. You always want to measure with the profiler first before you start optimizing. So hopefully this lesson helps. Optimization is really just in React these few steps: adding lazy loading to routes whenever you can, memoizing components when you see that there is slowdown because of the number of re-renders that are happening, and you either use pure component or React Memo depending on the type of component that you have. So hopefully that was a useful lesson, and I just hope that you go out there with that idea that always you should only optimize when necessary. In the next lesson, we are actually going to go back and explore some optimization hooks. So I'll see you in the next lesson.